You're listening to the Sketchnote Army podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rohde, the author of the Sketchnote Handbook and the Sketchnote Workbook. And this is the podcast where I chat with sketchnoters and visual thinkers and try to understand what makes them tick. Hey, are you looking for the ideal sketchbook for your sketchnoting practice? The Sketchnote Idea Book is the sketchbook designed for sketchnoters. Equipped with no bleed, no show-through paper, you can take almost any marker or pen you can throw at it. Get 10% off with code ARMY at airship.store. Hey everyone, it's Mike and I'm here with Kelvy Bird. Kelvy, it's so good to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Yeah, we've been trying to get you on. I think I've been trying to get you on. You may not know this, but for the last couple seasons, and it finally worked out. So I'm excited. You do some really cool stuff. You're really unique, I think, in the visual thinking space with the way you approach things and the way you think about things. That's my perspective. Is you're really unique, and so I wanted to bring that to other visual thinkers who may not know who you are. Right? It's such a wide community that there's little pools and spaces where you may not know things. So it's always good to reveal that to make you known. So I'll just turn it over to you. Let's first hear who you are, in your own words, who you are and what you do.
Well, first, thanks so much. When you said I'm unique, I had a little bit of I am. That made me happy.
Yeah.
And anyone who's watching the video, I have to apologize for my particularly summer feral 90-degree look. But for those of you listening, hope you'll be spared. So I'm Kelvy Bird. I grew up in the Hudson Valley in New York State, and just about an hour north of New York City. And my whole family was from the city originally, and I grew up near the woods, and a big part of my origin story is, and those of people who do know me have probably heard this many times, is that my parents split up when I was 3. And so I grew up going between households, between rule sets, between cultures. They were very culturally, not so much culturally different, but there were a lot of differences between the households at that time in the 70s. But both homes were in the woods. And so I have a strong continuity with nature. And also that led to my probably keen sense of observation when I'm in spaces. Is I'm always kind of at the edge of a system before engaging with a system, just from a very early childhood, a safety mechanism of.
That's the way you operated.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you want to know that if you're unsure of environments, you kind of check it out before you really immerse yourself in them. And that's really lent itself. I probably became a scribe in some ways because I have that natural inclination to observe. Then I went to. I studied art and art history at Cornell in upstate New York, and graduated in, I think 88 or 89, in the Reagan years, when there was what could you do as an artist? You could teach art, you could work in a gallery or a museum, or, to sort of feed your art, or you could live in the woods and make candles. And that's sort of what I had planned to do. I envisioned a really quiet, sort of slow life for myself, which has been very much like the opposite of what unfolded.
Of course.
At some point, so I was making art, and then I was living out in the Bay Area after school, and I met some people who I was doing collaborative art, and then I met some people Chris Allen, who was working with Matt. Well, he was working with and on the board for Matt and Gail Taylor. And of MG Taylor. And so he kind of got me connected into their work. And that was my introduction to scribing. And but still, it took me, I was working with them for a few years before I really started to be comfortable scribing. I took a lot of notes I did a lot of sketchnoting, I guess now we would call it, thanks to you.
Yeah.
And, time to really learn my visual vocabulary and my method of processing information, and then learn from people like Christopher Fuller and Brian Kaufman, Francis Gillard was in the system then, and alongside Peter Durand. So Peter and I kind of came up together in that space.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, and he's one of the other guests in this season.
Oh, cool.
So we get to hear his story. So you're going to be in with him. And as I understand, I know I only have a cursory overview of scribing in that space. My story was I sort of discovered the sketchnoting because it just made sense. And then as I got into it and started practicing it, stumbled into the whole scribing community. Like, wow, these are my people. I mean, they work on a large scale, but like the principles are the same. And as I understood over time, it seemed like there were two schools that you tended to come from. It was either M.G. Taylor or David Sibbitt's space that felt like the two. Maybe there were more. I don't know. Maybe there's some different ones in Europe, but in the U.S., those tended to be the two schools that you would come from. So I think like Brandy Agerbeck, I think she's M.G. Taylor trained, right?
Yes,
so,
yeah.
And they're probably similar, but I'm sure there's probably cultural differences that are a little different.
Well, I think it originated, the contemporary scribing, with David Sibbitt I've written a little bit about the history, and I did some research for my book. So somewhere out there's a history, and other people have expanded on it and brought it to be more current. But it originated in the 70s in the Bay Area with David and his colleagues.
Okay.
And then Matt and Gail were also working with this method in Boulder, Colorado, and with Jim Shannon, who was one of the first people to scribe in their context. The biggest difference, I think, is like David and his and the Grove use visuals as part of a facilitative, like they facilitate while they're drawing. But I think now it's become maybe people who learn from them more graphic. I shouldn't speak for this because I don't really know. More like graphic recording. And then with M.G. Taylor, it was the scribing was embedded in a range of facilitated methods like music and documentation, the environment, how the chairs were set, how the room was set, how walls were set up for people. So the whole scribing was one element of many domains of facilitation.
Almost like thought of as an experience, like a whole experience.
Yeah,
considered that way.
Yeah, it was a more immersive maybe. And also it wasn't just the scribing, the participants of these large scale design shops, they are called, are all scribing. So people while they're working are using big walls to draw on. And so it's very social in that regard, where it's immersive and social. Yeah. I should just say one thing I didn't mention, and is just after working with M.G. Taylor, I was living in the Cambridge area in Massachusetts and got involved in dialogue and systems thinking and human dynamics and the presencing work. And so my scribing has taken a particular turn in that direction because of my experience post M.G. Taylor. So, it all sort of weaves in, but yeah.
Interesting. Well, so you're a scribe and you do scribing for companies mainly, I would assume, in organizations.
Now I'm mostly scribing for. Oh, sorry, you were still going with your question there.
No.
Okay.
I'd love to hear. So who do you scribe for? Like, who are your main customers?
So now, since the pandemic, and even before, I was trying to focus more in educational contexts and less business. Okay. I haven't scribed in like a lot of big business contexts for a while, maybe a few companies here and there, but not like back, 20 years ago. And then with the pandemic, even before, I realized that the impact of flying on me as an individual and my own system of, my own body system, and then also just what it was contributing to for the environment and others. I didn't want to fly, so I'm not flying anymore. And that has really shifted work. So I've gotten more digital, and clients have included. So I go on site for stuff in Boston. I do a lot of work with MIT. And I've been teaching locally at some of the various schools like Babson and Andover. And I have a project at UMass here, close to where I live. And the Presencing Institute still, of course. I work with them when we're doing things on site. But it's really reduced. Oh, I've done a lot of work with the UN In the past year or two, that's been all digital.
Interesting. That's an interesting shift because I think there was a huge shift. The pandemic forced it on, I think, on a lot of people. It sounded like you were a little bit ahead of that curve, like you were sort of already edging toward doing digital stuff before you had to.
Not really. Like I picked it up pretty much like the first week of the pandemic, I was delivering a program, and then I quickly knew though, like we all are going to need to pivot. You know, it's like sometimes you can choose how you want to evolve your practice, and sometimes conditions evolve your practice for you. And that was a case in point where, you know, you could kind of figure out how to go with what was called for, what was needed. No, I was scrambling to figure it out. I had done some digital stuff before, but not live scribing, more like motion graphics or like.
Yeah. You hadn't fully invested in it as the primary way that you worked, right? That would be not the case. And I think a lot of people in the space, the visual thinking space, ran into the same thing. A lot of the interviews that I did around that time and after that time talked about the scramble for like Sketch Effect. I talked with William at Sketch Effect, and he talked about they were fortunate. They had been seeing digital and had been experimenting, but again, they had not committed fully to it. They were doing physical in-person stuff. They continue to do that. It'd be really interesting now that the pandemic's, you know, a couple years in the you know, since it peaked, like how has that impacted these companies? Like what percentage of digital versus in person? In some ways, I like to do a corollary. It's sort of like digital is a little bit like CDs or streaming, and then you know, like the scribing on a board is sort of like a vinyl record, right? It's like this unique thing or something, and in some senses or in some perspectives. But so I wonder, you know, I don't deal with those two together much. I do most of my stuff digitally, but I've been, you know, personally I do you know, analog things. So it would be interesting to hear from, maybe do some polling of companies that do this. Like, hey, what is the percentage? What's sort of what is the feeling in the space? Like, what do companies and educators, and what do they want? What do they think they want?
I think
maybe
businesses,
that's got to do with, you know.
Yeah, I think that business, sorry to keep cutting you off. I'm very excited to talk, so I have to like
let's do it.
Minimize my excitement here. But from what I've observed, businesses where the digital scribing might be projected large in a conference with big effect, that seems to be really popular. And when you have big audiences and you have a big screen, that really maximizes the show.
You can do a lot more than you can with just the board in front, which may be, for the people in a large space, hard to see, right?
But yeah, certainly. Yeah, I haven't worked like that in a while. What I tend to do are more immersive environments. Like I really like this feeling. My art was always like that. My fine art was more really geared towards like deep reflection. Like if you go into a room of Rothko's, like at the Tate Modern, or some space where you have, or like Donald Judd has a space out in like Marfa, Chinot, like out in Texas. When you're in an environment that has art like set up in a way where you go in and you are with the vibration of the work, that's a completely different experience than if you have one image on a wall that's projecting out. So or you go into a cathedral, right? Like you go into a space of mosaics or something that's been created to envelop you in vibration in some way. That's a very different experience than like one, you know, board at the front of a room. And I've done a lot, you know, all different types of setups, and I am not dissing, or, you know, I'm not throwing anything, I'm not putting anything down, because they all have their place. I tend to prefer these, like, when you can create some sort of resonance, like you create some sort of vibrational, a tonal thing that people aren't even aware of. It's just just more of a feeling, where the drawings help the sense of containment and safety in a space. and like a nest, the drawings become a nest. And so when I work with executive education at MIT, for example, they have a few rooms with dry erase boards that go all the way around the room. And so if I'm working for 5 days, the whole room will get filled by the end. And the group
Oh yeah.
that's in there there's a different type of pattern recognition that can also happen, because you're looking at, like, if you were to have your drawings, like a lot of them up from similar content or over the same set of time, things come out on one session that then might repeat the third or the fourth or the 10th session.
Right.
And so you can create like a visual, like icons or things that start to signal similar themes across time. That's really interesting to me. So I'm trying to seek out those types of situations, like where you're working with one client over time and the images become part of the cultural memory and knowledge. And yeah, does that make sense?
That's totally fascinating. It made me think of, for a while I worked for a company, Johnson Controls, big multinational in Milwaukee, and they redesigned our studio space for our design space, and they had this one corner by the front door they didn't know what to do with it. It's like this long, narrow space, so they just put a door on it and then put whiteboards in there. And I remember I had a big project that I was trying to sort out with lots of information, and that was my room. I claimed it, and I had stuff everywhere on the walls. I had stuff on the whiteboard, stuff stuck on the walls, but I always liked going in there because I could go in there and, like, if I would immediately get up to speed with where things were, and I would start seeing, like, oh, there's a connection between that wall, and I would start seeing all this because it was like concentrated in this space. And I'd sort of I would tell people I'm going to go live in my work for a little while, right? It was a pretty fascinating experience to be there. So
that's so cool. That's exactly what I mean. Where, because and this goes, we were talking earlier about like slow and fast thinking, and this goes back to helping the cognitive overload that we have in the world. So if you're helping people slow their minds down, you present data back. So you scribe in a way that reflects the data and the information in a session back with the specific words and, particular images that might represent things. But then you're also setting it up for a slower absorption rate over a duration, when the mind is not as pressed. And then you find, like in your room, you find other types of connections that you might not have made. And I mean, for me, that kind of gets into the mystery of life, where you're setting it up for discovery and like curiosity, instead of providing all the answers. You're just, like you're creating some conditions for the unknown to live still.
Yeah, you're sort of organizing the information to some degree, but you're not making necessarily connections. You allow the observer to make those connections. It sounds like that makes me. You mentioned at the outset we said that you're a little different. I think you're kind of unique in the way that you approach things, which is, I think, awesome. So I would love to hear, like, you talked about this difference when you went to Massachusetts. That you started thinking about different stuff. Talk a little bit about that origin. Like, how did that change what you had learned, or maybe it didn't change it, but maybe it built on top of it? And how did that change your perspective and the work that you did?
Yeah,
that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking it. So when I started, I came to Massachusetts to help open one of the MG Taylor environments in Cambridge. And while we were in that space, Peter Senge and the Society for Organizational Learning came in to see if they could use the space. And then another company called Dialogos came in to see if they could use the space, because everyone in the area was looking for a large-scale space to bring people together. Ultimately, it didn't work out because the space was too open. Like, the walls were movable, but they didn't offer enough containment and enough sense of
separation
and like quiet, and there wasn't enough quiet in it. So that didn't work out. But then I met these people and got really interested. What is this dialogue stuff? And so I started working more in that area. And what interested me, and still does, is it comes back to this mystery. Like when you have a circle of people and they're sitting together intentionally with a certain awareness or mindfulness about being together and slowing down together, what comes through is that's the dialogue, or that's the word, the word coming through the space. And that was really interesting to me. It probably links back to going between my parents. I haven't made this connection, but the space between, the ride between my mom and my dad's was about 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And so packing up from one household, going in the car with my brother, just like looking at the side at icicles on big sheets of rock or moss along the way or vines or things. That was the in-between space where I'd be able to, like a suspended reality. I used to love to fly for the same reason. Well, I never loved to fly, but once I was in an airplane and you're in that suspended state, I always liked that suspended state. And so in the dialogue work, you are in a suspended state. So you're consciously letting other people speak and waiting until it's your place almost, or when you're called to enter into the space, when the word is meant to come through you is when you speak. And so I immersed myself there. I thought it was really interesting. I basically did whatever they needed. I took notes for years, texting notes. I didn't draw. Then I started scribing in those environments, and then I started integrating. Then I realized, the drawings can represent this emergent space, which is very different than the drawings representing the words. And it's both, like the drawings representing the words and the drawings being like an echo in the pond. Like you throw a rock into a pond and there's the immediate plunk, and then you kind of have the ripples out, and I don't know, maybe something like that. So, and then when I got involved in the presencing work, it furthered that that kind of inquiry that I had, my own personal inquiry about how we can just be together in different ways, as human beings. Like, how can we be together as human beings in a way that feels whole and not fragmented? And how can drawings support that kind of wholeness? I think that's been my inquiry all along.
That's pretty cool. Talk a little bit more about presencing. I don't know if I have a good definition of it. I'd love to hear your definition.
Yeah, so the work was founded by Otto Scharmer and Katrin Kaufer and others, Arawana Hayashi. Dana Cunningham's another one who was in at the very beginning. And but Otto basically had done the research, and the presencing is when you bring the emergent future into the current moment. So you slow down enough to sense into what wants to unfold. So it's a combination, the word itself is a combination of presence and sensing. And
okay, got it.
So you're intentionally reflecting in a way to allow the future to find you. I don't know, it sounds kind of weird, but rather than projecting into the future and saying, like, letting it come from just your head of, I think this is a good idea, I'd like to build this building, and then you just kind of make it happen, and you kind of force your way through, which is our Northwestern society for, since the Industrial Revolution and before colonization. So, so it's a process of being found, rather than
a little bit like I sense emergence maybe is part of it, like letting things emerge.
Definitely.
I think too, I think about Stephen King. He talks about in an On Writing book that he would write these novels, and he said he was more like an archaeologist than a writer. Like he would have his brush and he would be brushing off bones, and the bones would tell him things. And he said that he would write, and he wanted to go in one direction with a character, and the character just refused and would go in a different direction and tell him what the character wanted to be or do. He thought that was really weird. But it reminds me of like this emerging, you're sort of immersing yourself in this story, which in his case, he's making it up, right? He's setting the conditions for it to be this situation, and he's setting out to say, I'm going to write a story about these 7 characters, and here's the story arc, but like within that, these characters sort of tell him what they want to be, which I thought was really crazy. But it sounds a little bit like what you're describing in some ways.
Yeah, it sounds very parallel. You're listening. It involves really deep listening to what you're bringing forward. So like when I'm drawing or scribing or like a lot of things now, cooking, like you feel into what it is you're trying to create, and and you listen to it to say, like, does it need more salt, or does it need more red, or does it need a big line here, or does it need more containment? So you're getting your cues from the thing, and your observation or your ability to attend to what is coming to life as you're with it is what sets apart the quality of the life that's coming to form. If that makes sense.
Makes me think too about being in a state of flow or being in the zone.
Yeah.
So like, getting in that, like, I've been in the flow state many times, and sometimes I'm able to get myself into it with conditions that I set, music or a coffee or whatever. And it's a great space to be. Time just disappears, which is strange but kind of cool. So I mean, it sounds like all these things sort of overlap a little bit.
Definitely.
The other thing I thought about when you talked about your trips between your parents was Dave Gray talks a lot. He wrote a book about liminal thinking. Talks about liminal spaces, so like the spaces in between, and even going back to, we talked about you're chatting a little bit about AI, like our whole way we're thinking about doing things is changing. We're sort of in an in-between state right now, I feel like, in these years, right? Going from, like, you might even say, like, pre-pandemic to post-pandemic we're in a transitional state. I don't know where we're going to end up, or have we ended up somewhere? I don't know. It feels like there's always a transition happening, but like it feels more transitional than normal.
Oh, definitely. I really agree with you there. And I love Dave's work, by the way. I'm such a huge fan of his, and I know that book. And yeah, but like I think I've already mentioned, the mystery, like preserving spaces of mystery. Like the liminal space is beautiful because it in some ways it's so for me it's like so hard sometimes to be in because things aren't clear, and I want things to be clear. I want to know when the plumber will show up, or I want to know what the weather will be so I can dress appropriately and not get caught in the rain like today. But then learning to be the acceptance, just learning to be with what is. My gosh, that's my lifetime's work. And that liminal space is, it can be so beautiful if we're not caught in anxiety and if I'm not caught in anxiety and overwhelmed by it, it can be a really mysterious and delightful place. But it's easy to get really, it gets thick too, right? Like you get a little bit, like you just want clarity.
Yeah. After a while, okay, I've had enough of this.
You just want to wake up and get vertical.
No more liminal. Let's go. Let's do something.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious. This is a really out of left field question, but when did you start drawing? Did you draw since you were a little girl? Like you talked about these trips between, like, what was the spark for your drawing, and how did that manifest over time? Obviously you're still doing it, so but you even talked about, like, when you met these people in Cambridge that you were taking type notes, right? So the visuals were not coming out. I've had those moments in my life as well, so but it still seems like an anchor or a touchstone or something that keeps bringing you back to it. Talk to me about as a little girl drawing, and then how that has sort of changed over your life.
I always drew from as long as I could remember. I mean, I grew up, like, my formative years were the 70s. And so in the early 70s, we drew, like we just did everything by
Mm-hmm.
hand. There was no,
Yep.
yeah, obviously no computers or anything like that. And so, actually, my dad was a computer programmer, and so I did grow up drawing on punch cards. He'd bring home
Yeah.
punch cards from coding, and so those were my early sketchbooks were punch cards. But yeah, it was always a sense making method for me. Before even knowing, obviously you don't know at 3 years old or 4 years old, you don't, there's not the word sense making, but I was always drawing. And, I was like doodling like little shapes or things. And we had lots of coloring books, and both of my parents are pretty creative, and my whole family's pretty creative. So we were surrounded by a lot of art, and art was really valued, which I think is something that I wish I saw more of in the world. Like every creative anything that my brother and I did was celebrated and put up over the previous thing on the refrigerator, and yeah, so we were very encouraged in that way. So I never had what a lot of people say is like I drew and somebody made fun of it and then it shut down the drawing, and there was a lot of like embarrassment about like, oh, I can't draw a certain thing. I never had that because my parents were so supportive of of whatever we wanted to make. But also, they were working all the time. They weren't around that much. So my brother and I would just go out in the woods and play with sticks and just be creative in lots of ways. But I always drew. And then going to art school, it just, I drew in high school, and
Furthered it. Yeah.
yeah, and I think I went on an art program in high school, with Parsons with School of Design, and yeah, I was really, really privileged to have my creative thread supported my whole youth, basically. Is that what
Yeah,
you
because I think
asked?
there's a
I got so
yeah. I think
enthusiastic
no,
about
that's
my
exactly.
parents there.
Yeah, no, I think that's all part of it. I'm just I always want to dig into like the motivations or the origins of how you ended up in a place, and it seems like there's so many people who start out drawing and then
Yeah.
they sort of, for whatever reason, there's all kinds of theories about why it happens. I'm sure it's varied for every person,
Yeah.
but kind of lose it, right? I experience it when I teach sketchnoting. The basics, like my approach is to bring it back to like shapes, as simple as like 5 shapes, so that you can just get into it without feeling overwhelmed. And then,
Yeah.
a lot of the people that do it, they feel like they haven't drawn since they were maybe in middle school or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, we talked earlier about maybe you're going to ask a question around like if you get stuck, what people do when they get stuck. But I would just say
Yeah.
for me, like drawing is just, there's nothing more freeing than working with my hands. And probably because it quiets my mind. I have a very rambling, anxious mind. And so, and overactive, in good ways too. But when I draw, it calms my mind down. And so it could be with a stick in dirt, or it could be, then in elementary school, we probably had different assignments, like, making books for your parents at Thanksgiving, or, and then in college, it was all the things you were supposed to do, like painting and printmaking, and then
Right.
scribing. It was also, scribing is just another sort of form. But in essence, like, you're free when you draw. I
Yeah.
feel free, and I do stuff that like nobody has to look at. That's the best, is when you relieve the pressure of anybody
Yeah, just do it for
seeing
you.
it. Just do it and make something on the inside visible on the outside, for yourself.
Yeah. It's been fun to hear and sort of get more of a sense of like where you came from and sort of what you're into, and you definitely have a different perspective about this stuff, which I think is needed.
Thank
A
you.
lot of times I think, because it's business oriented very often because they pay the bills,
Yep.
there tends to be, and I'm a practical, functional person, a lot because my dad was very practical. So I've always got this art side and the practical side, and they tend to merge in the middle. But there tends to be like this pressure to perform and deliver and meet deadline, and we have to. That's just part of life.
Yep.
So I think it's really important what you're talking about here is to not forget to set aside time or space to just let things emerge and reveal to you. It'd be really interesting if you have anything you can give us a show note for how to maybe get into this on a website or something, or a video that might help somebody who's curious about this to maybe experiment with that. That would be really interesting. We could talk about that after we're done with the show and put the link in so people could see what you're talking about and maybe give it a try.
Yeah, but I'll also say I'm also incredibly practical. So I haven't been talking about that, but I've had my own business for whatever 30 years, and I love spreadsheets. Anybody who knows me or has done any program with me, I'm like a spreadsheet maniac. I really like attention to detail, and I really like numbers. I really like knowing that I can pay for things, and they go hand in hand. Like my structured self, the structured side of me supports the creative side.
Interesting.
And the creative side couldn't exist without the structure. If I were just like all, emergent, blah, 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 like, it would be ungrounded. It would be like this airy sort of like swirly thing. No, like you need all the elements. So like, you need both sides. I've got boulders in my life too. I've got things holding me down and in, and I appreciate them a lot. Yeah.
The Sketchnote Army podcast is brought to you by the Concepts Sketchnote Workshop video, a unique, free, hands-on workshop video where I show you how I use the Concepts app to create sketch notes on an iPad Pro with an Apple Pencil. In this 1 hour, 18-minute video, I cover the infinite canvas as a sketchnoting power feature, how vectors give you complete control of brushes and sizing as you create sketch notes, and how vector elements let you size and repurpose your drawings for ultimate flexibility. The workshop video includes answers to common questions about concepts. Watch the workshop video for free at rodesign.com/concepts. Be sure to download the Concepts app at concepts.app and follow along with me during the workshop. See you there. What are the tools that you like to use? We talk a lot about tools. Not so much the tools make a difference, but sometimes they do. Sometimes it's nice to have things, or maybe there's, my dad always taught me there's the right tool for the job. Don't be afraid to buy good quality tools because, in 5 years you're going to need to take off that whatever and you're going to need that tool, right? So in my mind, I've got this idea of quality tools because like the last thing you need is like the marker or the whatever failing at a critical moment, right? So you got to get the good stuff that will be reliable. There's a reason why. So what are the tools that you like? Pens, paper, computer software, things that help you.
I am right with you with tools. I love tools, and I just restored an old like chair from the 60s that I had. I could not find anybody to restore it, and so I took it apart, and I had to like get all the glue off the little pegs. So I got this like little file set. And, appreciated my little, like teeny little files to like file in the little grooves of those pegs. So yeah, I'm a big tool person too. And in terms of supplies for our work, it's just been all these years of really refining what works. And I don't have a massive amount of colors anymore, or I have a very reliable like toolkit for each surface. So for dry erase, I get all my inks from, I used to get them from Neuland, but now that I'm not flying, I can't really get them anymore.
Yeah.
But, so I have a lot of, I mix my own colors also across all mediums. So I've got a whole set of like chalk stuff for blackboards, dry erase, paper and foam board, not foam board, like eagle cell board, that kind of slick, rigid surface, but a sustainable version, not foam board. But that's different than paper because paper has like a life to it like this. You draw on it and it starts to, it has humidity and it has other things going on. So I have slightly different sets for those. But I don't know, like not getting into the details. You have to just find what works for you. I wouldn't suggest, the Neuland outliner ink is a total staple. Like I can't not work. That's like critical ink to have. I would pay anything to have that shipped to me. But but I really lean towards what's sustainable. So all the like now what I use, or I get the I don't have anything here, but I have the shells. I can't think of the brand, that they're plastic shells that you can put oh gosh, what are they? I can't think of, my memory's going. So, but then I have the same shells for each ink, and then I get separate inks, and then I mix my own colors in those shells. I also have arthritis in my right hand, so I had been like wrapping all of my. I have like a wide markers with a wrapped with like a grip, so that my hand could hold a little more lightly, which I think contributes.
So you modified it.
Yeah, which I think contributes to a sense of flow, is when you're not holding a pen so tightly. That's been a challenge with digital scribing. Like everybody, I use Procreate probably. But the thing that I love about it are the layers, like the colors, using it in a way not to mimic what you can do by hand, but using it for its own, what you can only do with the digital medium.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've been trying to experiment more with, is what does each medium will lend itself to? And you can do things on dry erase that you can't do on paper. Like, certain textures, like putting something on and then like using your hand to like remove, or, but then you can't really blend colors on dry erase.
Yeah, there's limitations.
Yeah. Each have their pluses and minuses. But, yeah, and for like large scale, another thing is I've been trying to be sensitive to the production of things, like where am I getting my papers from? Like I haven't found a great paper source, but just trying to get things like reduce shipping, reduce waste, only do things that can be recycled or erased and washed down. Just like minimizing footprint. That sort of is priority. Yeah. Like that's kind of premium, is just minimizing footprint beyond a certain color or a certain brand or anything.
That's a consideration. We can circular economy, right?
Exactly.
This idea that it's got a planned lifespan all the way from beginning to end, and can be recycled in some form. Yeah. What about your personal, like I'm guessing you maybe do like personal notebooks where you write and journal and visualize. Like, do you have
I should show you. I should
you
show you. You're going to be horrified. But this is, I've been journaling or doing like sketchbooks since I was probably 12. So I've got like boxes and boxes. But at this point, it's like this, but I write. It's like I write. So it's like, it's all text.
So it's a craft paper cover, flexible. It looks like one of those. Maybe even like Moleskine, I think makes those, right?
It's just like writing. Yeah. And let's see if I have any drawings in here even. I might have like little things. Sometimes like little symbols help get an idea across more than. But I've been using these for a long time, and like sometimes it's mixed. I aspire to do the whole sketchnote thing at some point. I will. Because I think there's so much potential there, but they're not very organized.
Well, the great thing about sketchnotes, the way I look at them, is it's on a spectrum, right? You can have lots of writing and then just little images that help support that. Yeah, that's one way, or you can go full image with annotations at the other edge. So
yeah, well, again, like I was talking about drawing being a freeing art, writing is another freeing thing for me, because like no one's going to read these journals.
They're just for you.
Yeah, they're just for me. So if I'm doing something for someone else, I'll tidy it up. Like, it will be.
Different requirements.
Yeah. I mean, what if I'm taking notes for somebody else? I'd do it on my iPad at this point.
Your mind shift. You're in a different mind space when you're doing it for somebody else too. Yeah. Right. You're imagining who's the recipient, and is this going to help that recipient or not? And what's the most critical thing I can share with that person, which I don't know necessarily. Yeah. Right.
But I have to say, like, one other thing is just, and I'm aware for you of the time and for people listening, but is I really do bounce between order and free form. And what and I'm in sort of like a meta trend of it now of trying to be much more freeform in my life in general, like hence showing up like this today. But I've been ordered for a long time to be professional and like have a business and like you know, do programs and get clients and kind of have what I do like look good and look professional. And it's been very tiring. I have to say, like, it's been more exhausting than I realized. And so I'm trying to balance that out with just more spaciousness, more gardening, more stuff like that doesn't have to do with work. But that's like an age thing and probably where I am in my career. But if I had been more attentive to the extreme nature of our work earlier, I knew it was, it was extreme. I could keep up with the extremity of it, but like traveling and being like in different places, away from home, hotels, whatever, all that stuff, different foods, that ends up, there's a lot of rigor in that kind of work. And if I had been more aware of like balancing that along the way, I would have.
I mean, at the beginning, it's exciting, right? It's part of the excitement of doing the work.
Yeah.
And at some point, it becomes a drag to a degree, right? Like, I know that, you know, getting to the space where I'm doing the work is great, but like everything up to that point is like a struggle. And if you just have to do the struggle, right? You start to be more aware of the struggle, then it becomes less exciting in a way. I don't know.
I think it's been very exciting. More people are probably better at play. People with families have vacations built into their lives. Like I don't have a family, so I just worked all the time. So it's on me, but if you don't have like the structures of society kind of saying, okay, now it's summer, you should take time off, like you forget. Yeah. So I'm trying to remember all that now.
Trying to catch up.
Relearn. I'm trying to catch up with all of you who know better. Yeah.
Interesting. Well, talking about sort of guidance, let's jump into the question, the practical thing. And this is, give me 3 tips for someone who's listening, who's a visual thinker, whatever that means to them, who maybe is in a rut or just needs a little encouragement. What would be 3 things you might tell that person?
Yeah, so 3 tips. Coming back to the materials, I would say just like change it up. So if you're working on one thing over and over and over, use different colors, use different inks, just change it on yourself. Like give yourself different rules and see what you can do, like experiment. Put yourself in a space where you can experiment. That would be 1. 2 would be, I guess just the theme of this whole conversation is stay connected with the mystery of life. You know, with AI and technology just coming on full force, just don't ever disconnect from the beauty of the world. So 1 is experiment, 2 is mystery and beauty. 3, part of me wants to make it like 10. But 3, I guess it would have to be like, keep yourself healthy. Because if you want to go full force and travel around the world and, you know, have that intensity, you need to have stamina for that. And you need to look out for yourself physically and mentally. And if you choose to work locally, you know, in all ways, wherever, whatever medium you're using or wherever it is on the planet, like looking out for our own health and well-being, mental and physical, and also that of our peers and our communities, I think is probably pretty key. Bodies age, you know, so take good care. Yeah. Experiment, mystery, care.
That sounds like a good combo. It's good.
Yeah, I should listen to my own advice.
Sounds good. Well, where, Kelvy, can we find you? What's the best place to find your work? Websites? I don't know how much social media you do, but...
I have basically stopped social media. I mean, I still have all my accounts, but I'm posting very little.
Yeah. Sure.
But mainly because of AI, and it's just, I don't know. It's like I'm trying to pay attention to what's right underfoot, basically. That's the real thing. So I have my website, kelvybird.com. I wrote a book called Generative Scribing. If people want to learn more about the interior it's not at all a how-to book on, how to draw, or
Sounds
people have
philosophical
your
to
book
me.
for that, for, more, my practice or generative scribing practice. They could go to the book. It has a lot of frameworks for dialogue and presencing and those types of things. And also, just, talks about a model of practice that I use for my work.
So that would touch on if you were listening about the presencing we had discussed before, that would be the place to go to kind of go deeper.
That would be a place
would be that book
that would intersect presencing with scribing and visual practice. If you want to know more about presencing specifically, you could look for Otto Scharmer's work on Theory U.
Okay.
And there's a book on The Essentials of Theory U. That's a really good starting place. And then there's a book by Bill Isaacs on dialogue, which I think is also pretty foundational to my practice. Okay. Yeah.
Interesting. So you sort of taken these multiple worlds and blended them together in a way that made sense for you, it sounds like, in the book.
Yeah, probably it's my own. Yes, in the book, it definitely is aimed to integrate all the different pockets of work experience that I had in practice. Yeah.
No, that's great.
It's very easy reading. I have to say each chapter is about 2 pages. So with pictures. So
excellent. Well, there you go. That sounds like a perfect visual thinkers type of thing. Well, Kelvy, this has been so much fun to have you on the show and learn more about you and your history and sort of how you think about things. Thanks so much for the work you've done and the impact you've had in the community and you continue to have. So thanks for being who you are.
Well, thank you for all that. And thank you for who you are, because I'm just a huge fan of you and your work and all you've brought into the world and into our field of practice. And so right back at you.
No, thank you. Yeah. That's really great. Well, for everyone who's watching or listening, it's another episode of the Sketchnote Army podcast. Until the next episode, talk to you soon.
Bye.
The Sketchnote Army podcast was created by me, Mike Rohde, and brought to you by Rohdesign Studios. It's produced and edited by Alec Polianis of Amp Creative Studios. The theme music was created by John Schiedermeyer. To support the creation of this show, I invite you to buy one of my books, the Sketchnote Handbook or the Sketchnote Workbook. You can find the books on Amazon or go to peachpit.com and use the code ROHDE40 for 40% off. Please share this podcast with other visual thinking friends and be sure to leave a nice rating on iTunes or your favorite podcast listening app so others can find the show.